Hi everyone. This is meant to be kind of a survival guide because I know a lot of students typically in previous years have been really stressed out going into the second test because of the stoichiometry problems. And I want to kind of try and encourage you or set your mind at ease a little bit. And so the first thing is this Sunday today, this is when I'm recording it. And if you have any requests, for example, I'm going to show you the study guides from each chapter in a second and talk about how I write the test. Um, but if you have any, after looking at this, if you have any requests for more examples, things you're confused with, things you're stressed out about, please post those to the discussion page on D2L, and I will, if there's enough interest, I can record some more examples. Uh, but the test starts Wednesday morning, so I would need to have the examples. I'd need to record it on Tuesday night. Well, wait, but Tuesday night's too late for you to stay for the test on Wednesday. Better get it to me by Monday, sometime Monday, and then I could come in maybe Tuesday morning and record them. Because I don't want, if I post them Tuesday night, that's not fair to people taking the test at 8 a.m. on Wednesday. All right, so if there's any requests, I will come in Tuesday morning and record examples or anything else that you have requests for. Okay. And I'll be online discussion page, any questions leading all the way up to the test. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this around, the camera around, so you can look at the study guides, because that's what I look at the content, which I just went through. Um, so I'm old fashioned, right? So I go through the content, I've got printouts and just make sure, everything that we did from chapter 3 and 4, that they're examples. Uh, and before I write the test, because I don't want to put something on the test that's not, that we haven't done. That wouldn't be fair, right? So the old comment on end of semester evaluations for a class where a student says, oh, this class was very thorough. Whatever wasn't covered in the class was covered on the final. Uh, hopefully you'll never have a class that feels that way. So I'm just going to point the camera down at the study guide, um, study guides here. This always takes some fumbling. Bear with me because it's going to be backwards and I got to loosen it, spin it around, and here we go. I think I'm almost to where it'll be readable, and let's get it focused in a little bit better. Okay, so hopefully you can read that, but you don't really need to read it, right? Because this is posted. But what I want to show you is what I do, what I've just done for each topic as we go through. And that is, I look at the topic and see, okay, what was the date that I discussed that in a pencast or a video? And so for all of these, I've got that. And then where in the homework were there examples of those? So the atomic mass, for instance, being able to calculate the average atomic weight from percent composition of isotopes. So that's the way I like to do a study guide. And I've talked about this before, but I haven't pointed to them as we did it. So I don't like to list just topics, right? Know this, know that. It's be able to. What do you have to be able to do to show me that you learned that material? And so there's an example of this in chapter 3, part 2 homework of quite a few examples. And then, um, so you can see all the different ones here, when we discussed it, and you just go to D2L, you can see all the content and then what homework set it was on. And so this test is mostly chapter 3, right? There's a lot more chapter 3. It's a huge chapter. I think I said that at the outset. Um, and you can see which homework set covered each of those examples. So now, as we're looking at this, what I want to do, and I almost wish I could flip it around so you see my face again, because this would be something I'd like to do in person. Um, some things are more important than others. So I want to talk to the students who are really freaking out, who are really struggling to get their homework done, struggling to understand the material because, it Gen Chem can feel like you're drinking from a fire hose, right? It's not very pleasant. Even if you're thirsty for knowledge, it's not a very pleasant way to get a drink. And so, and that, on behalf of chemistry everywhere, I apologize for that. That's the way it is. And I try to make it more pleasant, which I think I'm flailing at this year in the, not being in person. But anyway, for those of you who are struggling, some of these things are a lot more important than others. Okay, so let's give an example of that. Let's go down here. Be able to calculate grams or moles of any reactant or product given grams or moles of any other reactant or product. So that's the full-on stoichiometry calculation, right? You've got a reaction, it's balanced, it'll be balanced for you because that's a separate question. And you're given grams of one thing and you have to go through all the conversions to get to grams of something else, grams to moles, moles to moles, moles to grams, and so on. And so there are a few of these. These are the hard problems in Chapter 3, Part 2, and Part 3. But on a test, how many of those problems do you think there can be? I mean, how long does it take to do that problem? Or Chapter 3, Part 3, limiting reagent problems, right? How long does it take to do a real limiting reagent problem, like the examples that we did in September 21st, September 23rd? Right? The full calculation where you have to take both reactants and calculate it through to the products. How long do those ones take? Take a long time. How many of those can a reasonable chemistry teacher put on an exam? Right? So assuming that, I've convinced you that I'm not a sociopath and that I want to be a relatively reasonable person here, how many do you think there can be? 2 total of these? 3 maybe? Takes a long time to do them. Maybe not 3, probably 2. Because those are very difficult. They take a long time, right? Will there be 1 or will there be 6 calculations where you do empirical and molecular formulas? Well, I don't need to put 6 of those long. Those are long calculations, right? To calculate empirical formula. There's a procedure. You got to do the grams to moles, divide by the smallest number of moles, figure out how to get to whole number, blah, 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 right? That takes a long time. So there's 1 of those, right? Now, there could be conceptual questions about any of these that are meant to be shorter than the full-on long calculation, right? So, and there are some of those in the homework, the empirical and molecular formula. So you could just be asked which one of these is an empirical formula. Is CH2 an empirical formula or is C2H4 an empirical formula? That gets at the concept, and you know that, well, this is not an empirical formula because it's not the lowest whole number ratio, right? And so there's conceptual questions also with whole numbers in the limiting reagent problems that we'll get at that. But in terms of the calculations, maybe 1, maybe 2 total of these big long ones, right? So what does that mean if I'm a student who's, really, really struggling, and this is really, really hard for some students? Well, what that means to me is, as your coach, we're not going to worry about shooting 3-pointers, okay, or half-court shots in this game. What we're going to do instead is we're going to go back up here and we're going to look at the short problems, okay? Now, I don't want to say these are layups because that would, that could potentially be insulting. But compared to these other problems, these need to be much simpler. So what does that mean? Well, converting from grams to moles or moles back to grams or number of atoms, all those ones, they're in Chapter 3, Part 1. So if you are stressed, freaking out, and this is very difficult for you, spend a lot more time looking at chapter 3, part 1. And then once you feel like you've mastered grams to moles, moles to grams, and the number of atoms when you use Avogadro's number, and just interpreting the formula. These are conceptual questions that can be very short, right? Here's a formula. How many hydrogens are there? Well, there's 4, right? We know what that means. And that means there's 4 moles of hydrogen in 1 mole of this whole thing, or 4 atoms of hydrogen in 1 molecule of this whole thing. So those you can do pretty well just by mastering this basic stuff, chapter 3, part 1. So compared to the amount of time it takes to master these calculations, the chapter 3, part 1, and you have, in order to do the harder ones, you have to be able to do chapter 3, part 1 first. So that's where, if you're stressed and this is very difficult for you, start with that stuff, and you can do pretty well on the test just by mastering that, by mastering interpreting the formulas. How many balanced chemical reactions can I have on there? Being able to balance them. Well, that can take a long time too, right? It's like a puzzle. Sometimes you see it right away. Sometimes it takes a long time. So there's not going to be a ton of those. There's going to be multiple of these ones, right? And so, again, hopefully you can balance a reaction, but there won't be as many of those. So you just kind of chip away at it, right, with what you can do. And knowing the definition. So study, there's tons and tons of calculations in here. There's, 25 to 30 questions on a Gen Chem test like this. They're not all calculations, because if I do all calculations, we can't finish the test in an hour, right? It's just a race. Who's the fastest? So there's going to be conceptual questions. And so make sure you study the notes, read through the notes, and know the definitions, know how to identify empirical formula, and know how to just look at it and answer some of these where you don't even have to do a calculation, right? You look at it and say, well, I'm going to look at the periodic table and see what's the atomic mass of this atom. What would be the mass of 1 mole? Well, it's that number on the periodic table in grams, right? And so my hope is that by doing that, focusing on this stuff first, relieve your stress a little bit. That will get you a long ways towards doing, towards passing the test. Okay. And now let's look at chapter 4. And this is more certainly for everyone. Hopefully it'll be helpful, because we only did part of chapter 4, and so it'd be nice to know which parts, right? And so I've gone through here. These are short questions. So September 28th, I guess that's actually probably tomorrow, right? I already have it posted. So, if you want to get a step ahead, the definition of weak, strong, and non-electrolytes. And then the molarity calculations and definitions, these can be short questions. Again, what if I give you the moles and the liters? Can you do that one pretty quickly, hopefully? So you master these. These would be really, really important. And there's a lot of these in this chapter 4, part 1. Okay, so that homework's going to be really important as well. And then, all this stuff. So this is the stuff we didn't get to. I've just X'd it out on the study guide. I haven't, online, of course, this is going to go on the next test, so I'm not going to change that here. But we didn't talk about these kinds of reactions, certainly not oxidation reduction reactions. So we're not doing that, right? And then net ionic equations and knowing what a spectator ion is. That's in that chapter 4, part 1 as well. And we did that actually when we did just the regular balancing reactions. All right, now one other thing. You'll notice that what I found here, and this was intentional because the chapter 3 homework and calculations can get kind of overwhelming. But if I just pan out, I did talk about titrations, right? And so we know the definitions of the titrant, endpoint, or equivalence. When we said we were just going to use those interchangeably. Um, but then we did calculations with molarity because I needed to do that for the limiting reagent reaction that we did. But you'll notice we didn't do any homework where there was a titration calculation. We didn't do any homework where we had a reaction and we had to figure out, molarity and volume to molarity or volume of another thing, right? And so what does that mean? Yeah, we did it in the content. If I'm not a sociopath or a psychopath, would I put that on the test? What do you think? Well, of course I wouldn't, because I like to think that I'm a nice person, and that would be insane, right? It's not in the homework. Yeah, we talked about it in class, but it's not in the homework. It's not on the test, right? Definitions, of course, those kind of things, they're on the test. But I actually did this on purpose because I just thought if I put that in the homework on chapter 4, that would be too brutal and would not be fair. And it makes more sense to put it in the next section. And it's been many, many years since I've actually been halfway through a chapter and had a test. You know, that that happened because of the compressed schedule, and I had planned it that way because I didn't think there was any way we could get through 2 whole chapters, especially 2 of the biggest chapters in the book, by exam 2, right? And so I decided to do a chapter and a half, and I think it's going to work out okay. So again, um, basics first, the short calculations, the one-steppers, the molarity definition, plug it in, find the missing thing, and the chapter 3 part 1, those one-steppers, and then all of the definitions, right? So knowing that the definition here, that number on the periodic table for the atomic weight, that's the average, and there may not be, probably isn't, any single atom that has that weight because each individual isotope would have a different weight. So looking at that content and trying to understand it and know the concepts, as well as being able to do the calculations, because there will be a question about that, right? There will be a question about that. Carbon is 12.01 AMU, but there aren't any carbon atoms that weigh 12.01 AMU. And I say that in the content when we talked about it. So, just especially where we've got pen casts, it takes too long. You're not going to listen to that stuff again. God, I hope not. But you've got it notes from it if you do the YouTube, or you've got the printouts and you can just read through it. And when you read through it, because I wrote down everything, right? Everything that was important that I said, I wrote down. And so you can read through it in almost no time, right? And then you've got that and you go, well, wait, I don't get what this is that he wrote here. Then you could go back and click on the pencast or go to the YouTube where I talk about it. So that's what I would do. Remember, request any examples, and I will, if I get some requests, post it, not emailed to me, post it to the discussion page. If I get any requests, I will record Tuesday morning so that you can look at them the Tuesday before the test opens on Wednesday. All right, thanks everyone. Good luck on the test.